Hi, welcome to the Voice of Bold Business Radio. I am your host, Jess Dewell of Red Direction. Today is a good day. Every day at the Voice of Bold Business Radio is a good day. In fact, when we get to learn, when we get to adapt, when we get to stretch our brains and see what else can we do to be our best selves, to be the stewards of our own personal values, as well as those of our companies, the organizations that we participate in, both at work and in our personal lives. And what it comes down to is how we show up. So with that said, I want to take a minute and talk about this show called Behaviors and Relationships Leading to Highly Functional Teams. We have the ability to choose. And in that choice, we also must be discerning. And I say that specifically because in this discernment of the choice that we have, we are either forwarding a project, a relationship, a communication, an email. We also could be detracting and going in a different direction than we intend. And so when we're talking about behaviors and relationships today, when we're talking about servant leadership, we are going to address those things, putting on the awareness, putting on the focus to make sure that the projection of the projects, of our interactions, of our relationships is always growing deeper roots and moving forward. We will be back right after this, and I will introduce you to Greg.
Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business, the show that provides everything smart leaders need to evaluate situations, build relationships, and create solutions. Jessica Dewell candidly talks about the skills necessary to build tenacity and do more with less. And now, here's Jessica.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate it. And welcome, Greg. How are you today?
I'm wonderful. Thank you. Yourself?
Doing well. I mean, it looks sunny here in the Denver area, and you walk outside and your toes get a little cold. It's my favorite part of spring.
A bit windy.
Oh, yes, it is that also today. Very windy. So for our audience, I would like to take a second and introduce you because when we talk about servant leadership, a lot of things come to mind. And as our audience is listening to us and watching us today, we want to make sure that we set the stage with your background that's going to shape some of our conversation. And then, of course, as always, it's the Voice of Bold Business Radio. Who knows where we will go? So our audience, thank you for joining us today. Greg Aden is a servant leader who is committed to raising his two boys to understand the value of impact, influence, and inspiration. He serves, guides, and leads a variety of wonderful human beings so they will show up more powerfully in their lives and in the lives of others. He has been a leader his entire life, and he loves learning by asking the most powerful question known to man. Why? All right, Greg. Well, first we're going to start right there. Why is that the most powerful question in the world?
Because it comes from the heart. It comes from the whole essence of what we do. And then it obviously gives us an opportunity to discuss how we do it. And I just wrote a brief message to a young lady who's part of our precision flight team. And albeit she's not even 19 years old, she's being asked to describe her achievements, her community services, and her academic achievements. And I said, why don't you just tell your story? And her response was, what do you mean? Well, what is your why? Why do you do what you do? And whether you're 19 or 29 or 39, it all starts with what really motivates us. And in my opinion, that is the why.
Yeah. All right. So let's make a distinction, shall we? Because I don't know if you know this. I don't like the word why. I don't like the question why. Did you know that?
I did. You must have small children.
That's part of it. But even before I had small children, one small child, yes, I'm all about figuring out the big why, right? The why we are here. Why do we do what we do? If we were looking back, what can we learn so we can figure out why we're going forward? I like those. But when you ask me, why do you need to fold your clothes? Or why do I need to have this deadline? Or why do I need to do those things? That in lies the thing. I'm like, these are not big life-changing questions. And so sometimes we just got to do stuff. Is there a delineation for you as well on that spectrum, or am I all on my own here? Which is fine if that's the case.
No. And trust me, 40 some years ago when I was 9 or 10 or whatever, I remember asking why all the time. And I'm assuming my dad would have the same response if we were to call him up today than he did those years ago. And he would say, "You always asked why." And perhaps that's how I became a leader and a leadership coach today. But for me, it was I wanted to know why I'm doing is important to what we are doing.
Yes.
And I didn't realize it as an 8 and 9 year old, but at the time I was just curious, and I love curiosity, and I think that's how we learn and grow. And when we learn and grow, we can share, and when we share, others grow. So I agree with you as far as why should we fold the clothes, especially for some that say I don't need them folded, just throw them in my drawer or throw them in the bottom of my closet. So anyway, yes, there's a delineation between the nebulous why and the why of an organization, the why of a team. So yes, I think we should draw a distinction between what's minuscule and what's magnificent to discuss.
Oh, that word magnificent. Wow. Magnificent. It's true. And when we use curiosity, I know in my experience, whether it's with my almost 7-year-old, whether it's with my husband, whether it's with my friends, whether it's with, Eva and Scott and the rest of the Voice of Bold Business or the Red Direction team, we have some great conversations. And they are fantastic starters to really figure out not only what different perspectives are that are joining the table, that are joining the conversation. It's also keen to be able to recognize, okay, so when Eva goes about it like this, and Greg goes about it like this, and Scott goes about it like this, and I go about it like this, it's neat to see how we can then use that to step back a little and go, how do I help them more? And that's my role. How do I help them more? Why they are here is their story, and we have decided to work together. And so when I think right there, though, before we get into servant leadership, we need to define it. So let's just pause right there and talk about servant leadership from your experience and what you mean, because this concept of servant and servant leadership
Yeah.
is tricky, and it causes reactions in some people.
Well, let's start with the word servant. And I think the old school, the old, I almost said Old Testament, the old history would look at servants as those beneath me or those beneath us. A clap of a hand, a ringing of a bell, and all of a sudden a servant would appear. That's certainly part of what servant leadership is, but to its core, servant leadership is serving first, leading second. I don't know if you can put an emphasis on one word or the other, but when you combine the two, they're very powerful.
Oh, okay. So one does not outrank the other in your world. They're two words that have equal weight in different ways.
Equal weight. However, the key is to know that the serving comes first as a leader. And there are 27 types of leadership: intelligent leadership, coincidental leadership, magnificent leadership. I mean, it goes on, and there's been several books written on all those topics. And this particular one is the core in my mind or my heart around what leadership truly is. And that's taking care of or serving another as a leader. So serve first, lead second. That's really as complicated as it gets. But it also just comes from a place of a feeling or a desire to serve one another. Um, that's also very important to get out on the table. If a leader doesn't have a true, sincere desire to serve or care for another, he or she probably will never be a true servant leader. That makes sense?
It does. So we're going to stick with this concept. Uh, I think we will just go, we all understand and have a working definition and come together around what the concepts of leadership are. And so when we add servant to that, and you're saying servant is must come first. It's not leadership servants, it's servant leadership. And when you put them in that order, you just described part of it, I believe. And if we were to dig in a little bit further, in this concept of servant leadership, is it when at all costs we will put ourselves out to remove the obstacles of the team that surrounds us?
Well, sure. I think servant in the contents of leadership does need some additional definition. And I think you hit the nail on the head. It is to, how may I serve you today? What do you need this week? What can I do to make your job most efficient and help you raise your value within the company?
Mm-hmm.
Now, notice I didn't say, what can I do to make you happy? What can I do to make your job easier? What can I do as a leader to help you not do anything but what you want to do? It's all, and I say that tongue in cheek because the servant is there from the heart. The leader is there from the entire person. But again, the combination is critical. We're not there to make people happy. We're not there to make their jobs as simple as possible. We're there to remove obstacles and add value to their position.
Which means to be challenged, to be stretched, to have the opportunity to grow, to let them figure out what it takes, and are they going to choose to have what it takes in this role, in this position?
You brought up one of my most favorite words, and that is choose or choice. Everything I do is inviting somebody to make a choice, make a decision, make a shift, challenge them based on what I, as a leader, heard them say they wanted. But yes, now that I understand what someone wants, then I can serve him or her and help them get to where they want to go. And that's the premise, I should say, of servant leadership. But again, what they want and what their choices are should always cascade from the ultimate objectives of the family, of the team, of the organization, etc.
I was looking back in preparation for this show, and I say I was looking back, which is weird, but I was reflecting, and I was thinking about the people who I followed, the people who I thought I was going to follow and ended up following other people, the relationships that turned out to be difficult when I didn't know they were going to be difficult, and how it shaped my leadership. And I have two men. I had male role models in two different scenarios, and I have to tell you, they were my absolute best the best construct that I can pull from on a regular basis. What would they do? How would they show up in this situation? What would they tell me when I go talking to them in this way? And they did exactly what you were saying before. They never tried to make me happy. They never tried to make my job easier. They listened, they offered suggestions, and they opened a dialogue so that I could not only discover a little bit, but really, and not even to get clear, but really feel more solid in the place that I was in. So if it was hard, I was more solid in the fact it was hard. And if it was challenging, I was more solid in the fact that it was challenging and that they were going to be there and I could talk to them, but they weren't going to solve my problems for me. And I think about that and I pull from those experiences on a fairly regular basis, not only for parenting, which, by the way, servant leadership is great for parenting.
Agree.
It is great for community, and it is really good for business. And I would be interested, and I don't, I'm not going to put Eva and Scott on the spot, but I do reflect sometimes, and I'm like, am I doing everything that I can do to make the lives of my team easier? What does that look like? How does that work for them? And so if I'm a leader and I'm listening to this, or if I have a leader that's not really serving me, not because I'm unhappy or I feel like I need to, my life's too hard or whatever it is, but I want to grow, I want to develop my own leadership. What would you tell us is the first step to being able to open that dialogue and have that relationship?
Trust. Trust is key. Trust is key in any relationship. And as you were mentioning your relationships with the two male mentors or role models, I was going to ask you, during that relationship, did you feel safe? Did you feel secure? Not as a woman, but as an employee, not as a female, but as a partner with those. And did they provide a safe and secure environment for which to have these conversations, to provide honest and trustworthy dialogue? That's another role of a servant leader. It's not just to remove barriers, it's to establish the kind of atmosphere and working boundaries that others are watching.
Isn't that interesting? So I'm gonna expand on that, because there are two I would say, yes, there was trust there. It was very different. One, I could count on that person. I knew where they would be, when they were going to be there. I knew that if I asked something and there was a commitment made, that was the case. They were going to do what they were going to do. The other one, he basically, if you will, pushed me out of the nest over and over and over again. So there was the trust that I always had a nest to come back to. However, I I was going to be stretched and pushed and given the opportunity to choose how far was I going to go this time? How far was I going to go this time? So
Yep.
I would say they were very different, which is probably why I have two. How about for you? I mean, if we were to turn that around and you were to look back around trust and your role models, is there somebody that comes to mind? And was it similar in the way that you feel about them now reflecting, or was it even different than the two that I've described?
Well, no, it's funny you bring that up because about 3 weeks ago in a strategic connections meeting I'm involved with here in Denver, the opening question that I asked the group was, who was your most influential person in your life? And 70% of the people would say mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, etc. And for me, it was Jim Ainsworth. He was the one of the owners of at the time, a small financial services company who they had hired me to do a variety of things. I didn't know anything about financial services, quite frankly. But Jim's approach was, what do you think we should do, Greg? What resources do we need? Give me two solutions and then make a recommendation. And he had this beautiful acronym, and I don't remember all the letters, but it meant, I only do what only I can do. And then I trust you to do everything else. Now, at first, I heard that and I thought, well, he just doesn't want to do anything. He wants me to do everything. But as a leader, he was not grooming me to be anything other than the best me I could be, but he was serving me in a way to challenging me to do the research, to make the choices, to come up with solutions and make recommendations. So extremely beneficial as an influencer.
Isn't that interesting? So I heard uh, boundaries and I heard know yourself in that story.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because one of my current role models, one of my current mentors, her name is Karen. And she I am watching her behavior very closely, and she probably doesn't even know. If she ever watches the show, when she checks in, she's going to be really surprised, I believe, because she's watching her navigate different situations allows me to go, oh right, I could be I can do more here. Not could be better. I can do more here to be clearer about where I need to be, to be clear about what needs to happen next, to be clear because just because I can do it doesn't mean I'm the best person to do it. And I know that's something that that's going to be an ongoing, that's the one of my life lessons is just because I can do anything. If I put my mind to it, and I decide it's a priority, I will do what it takes to figure it out.
Sure.
However, it's not always the best thing to do. And that's one of the things I heard you say. And I feel like that's one of those places where influence is grown in terms of being able to navigate those boundaries. And when we're navigating those boundaries, do you have like I mean, there are going to be people out there like that have different styles and different personalities. And
Mm-hmm.
what I was modeled and I'm working on changing is different than what was modeled to you and where you're coming from. So is there like a first step when we're thinking about that? How do we build trust? Thinking about that quote that you shared to create a boundary and then be kind and firm.
Well, I think that the boundaries are discussed between the two individuals. Describe challenging, describe being fierce, describe timeliness, describe trust, describe safe and secure, um, describe independent. Um, and I think once you have some definition around that, and then I know we're going to get into some distinctions later, but it also helps to decide what does appeasing look like versus a serving, because a lot of people believe that coddling and being babied, so to speak, is serving, and it just isn't. So boundaries around key definitions of the relationship, I think that's the best way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
And And when I coach, I ask, what do they want? What are their challenges? Let's talk about their strengths, not just their areas of opportunity to grow, but where are their strengths now? There's even a book called Strengths-Based Leadership, if you've seen that one. And it's all about modeling our behavior and our reminders around what is the person good at. I'm not saying we need to harp on what's keeping them from being successful, but I certainly want to bring awareness to it. So boundaries around those kind of conversations allow for a much more powerful trust-based relationship.
We have a question from our audience. Mark is asking, how do we differentiate and approach working with a leader who pushes me to be the best version of me and the one who is actually just throwing everything on top of me?
I would say the appreciation for both styles would be the first ask. If I were coaching Mark or talking with Mark, I would ask them to appreciate where these people are coming from, because there are reasons. It could be anything from patterns to laziness to I one, want to see people grow. I two, don't care about growth. I just want to get the job done. A lot of leaders think results is the end game, and I differ. I think results are an output of the end game, and that is relationships. Leadership is determined. A good leader is determined to make sure that the people around him or her are growing. That's job number one. Results, yes, are always important, but it's an output of how we're serving others. So to Mark, I would say start with empathy for where these people are coming from, and then I'd invite Mark to have serious conversation with both and share with them what kind of leader motivates him the most and see what kind of reactions they get. It's interesting, Mark has two leaders. I'm certainly, there's maybe one primary leader and one secondary leader. So share with them what you appreciate about them first, and then remind them, given the appropriate opportunity, what shifts you'd like to see in their leadership style. And hopefully they'll be open to that.
And what if there's a little bit of courage or confidence necessary because there's a lack of safety or trust?
Well, the answer is there's always going to be courage when we're having conversation with a leader. But again, if we know we belong there, we know that what we're asking for in a conversation, or what we're asking for in terms of change, we also know that it's real, it's sincere, and we're not just asking for something that is important to us. So how do you muster fear, or how do you muster courage and eliminate fear? You've got to practice. You've got to practice asking, let's just make one Nancy and one Jim.
Mm-hmm.
If Nancy's the leader that you appreciate, you might even have a conversation, not so much about Jim, but about different behaviors that don't motivate you, and see what kind of results come from that. And then practice talking to the other person in the mirror for a bit, so you can go in and be organized.
Okay. All right. We're going to go back to appease, because we were talking, this has come up twice, and it makes sense that this is a part of it. And this, I believe, is the sticking point when people have a bad reaction to the concept of wow, the words are just all jumbled in my mouth. Servant leadership. They're like, well, I'm supposed to make these people happy. Well, I got to figure out how to keep them motivated. Well, now I've got to appease them. Everybody's got to get these ribbons. And I've heard you say twice, that's not the case. And I really I'm repeating it, and I'm bringing it back home, because I want everybody listening to get the fact that you and I, and we both come from the same perspective on this, is that we have made an agreement to have a relationship in this time and space. And how we are showing up is defined by what we do and say at the beginning. And so let's say we're in a company whose culture says that there's leadership and service as company values. The actions that are being taken, though, are driving the results. So we have a conflict there. Then I am in the middle of this going, okay, and I'll put me in the middle of this in this hypothetical situation. I'm in the middle of this. I see there's a gap. I'm like, but there's not service because there's not leadership because I have nobody to ask, regardless of how many times I try or how much courage I muster, and the confidence to speak up respectfully. The other piece of this that is, I'm talking to think now, Greg. If you can't tell, just so go with me.
I'm with you.
Okay.
I see all the words coming out behind you. You don't.
Okay,
I do.
good. Thank you. And so we've got this piece, we've got that piece, and we see this gap. And we know that there's got to be a change to be made, and we're trying, we're attempting, we keep figuring it out because we know we want to. So if I'm in the middle of that, and let's say I'm a middle manager, so I'm a senior manager, I might even be a director in an organization, and I recognize this gap and I'm not making any progress. What behaviors can I do? What changes can I make in how I'm showing up to at least lead by example so that it causes a shift in conversation or a shift in environment in just enough of a way to open that door?
Beautiful questions, and thank you for the backdrop. I would say you answered your own question when you said agreement.
Yeah.
There's agreement and alignment are key behaviors and outputs, a result of servant-based leadership. You've got to make sure that everybody's on the same page relative to our overarching objectives. Do you agree this is why we're all here? This is our ultimate purpose. Yes, yes. And if there is, then you move on to clarity about how we're going to get there. And I call them critical success factors, or behaviors with results in specific areas. And then you also mentioned if there's some conflict. Well, part of the conflict when a leader has conflict is because he or she isn't being consistent. They're talking about expectations with one person and talking agreement with the other. Expectations don't get us anywhere. They either are met or we get disappointed when they're not met. So you might expect something from somebody, but in terms of agreement, that keeps the consistency in the behavior. How else you can show up is consistent relative to saying that you're engaging versus accessible. Engaging is a behavior, accessible is a position. I have an open door policy. Come in and bother me or ask me or whatever anytime you want. Well, that's a position. A behavior is come out of your office and engage and demonstrate servant leadership as an example. So I think the key words there are agreement, creating alignment, and making sure your behavior is consistent across the board.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, everybody listening, this is program 139 of the Voice of Bold Business Radio, where we have our special guest, Greg Aden, and we're talking about behaviors and relationships that lead to highly functional teams.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you're already doing this, so keep doing it. Hashtag VBB Radio. Send us your questions. Eva and Scott are watching, and we also want to make sure and take a moment to say, hey, catch this. Find the replay afterwards. You can watch it on YouTube. You can watch it here on Facebook. You can also subscribe to any of the platforms that play podcasts that you are already part of, and listen to the words that Greg is sharing and listen to what we're sharing across the Voice of Bold Business Radio, which will help us, provide us a guide, give us the compass to be the leader that we want to be in the position that we find ourselves in today. So, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to add to what we had chatted before that is a great leader, not a good leader, but a great leader asks questions as to how am I doing? Because to Mark's question, if the leader doesn't have the courage or isn't mildly interested in how he or she is showing up as a leader, so they can be more consistent, they can be more transparent, they can be more believable, then that is also part of the problem within the organization. So the leader, in my opinion, should ask, how am I doing? How am I showing up as a leader? Again, not what more I can do for you to help you have an easy position in the company, but ask that question. And that dialogue from that question forward is the key to some of the better relationships I've seen. It goes beyond curiosity and it goes into, I'm really interested and committed in being the best leader I can be.
And that said, our very own Scott has asked a question. He thinks everything that you're sharing is amazing. And he says, everybody talks about leadership. Can we also talk a little bit about the role of followership?
Amen, brother.
Right?
Yeah.
I know. He should just come on and join us. He comes up with the best questions.
He should. And it's hard to be a good leader until you're a good follower. And what does a good follower mean? Didn't we appreciate, we respect, we recognize, we see leaders, and we let them know? As a good follower, whether you want to be a leader or not, let's also agree, if we could, Jess, that we are all leaders. Period.
Well, yeah, okay. Because I distinguish leader and leadership.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. You may not be in a position of leadership, meaning you have followers, but you are always going to be a leader relative to your own self-leadership.
Perfect.
So back to being a follower. A follower is someone who, in the face of conflict, makes the best decisions for the team. In the face of someone else being disruptive, they step up and support what needs to be done for the team to accomplish what it is they accomplish. A follower has difficult conversations in private and praises in public. And you'll say, well, that's what a leader does. Well, no, that's a follower also recognizes what we're doing well and what we're not doing well, and has the emotional intelligence of what to say and when to say it. And if you can hear some similarities, they are. Because once you learn how to be a good follower, then you can be a good leader, in my opinion.
I like that very much. And so if I were to take away something from that nugget, it's, where am I following today? And am I being a good follower? Because that will inform my internal guide and my internal compass that I'm growing for the questions I should be asking to be, and I said should on purpose, because we may not be, to go from being a leader to a great leader.
Well, think about the support a team member. We can use team member interchangeable with follower. The support that a team member has for the coach of a basketball team, the coach of a flight team, whatever. But a team member who follows and, again, recognizes, respects, and appreciates not authority, but the leadership position of someone, because someone has invited himself or herself to be a leader, or they were anointed, or they were appointed. But a good follower is not disruptive. They're not disrespectful. They're not childish. And I think that's the best advice I can get in terms of how to be a better follower.
That's fantastic. One of the things I know you're really passionate about is courageous conversation. Will you define that for us and tell us a little bit about it? Because we've been talking about courage and we've been talking about confidence, and the things that we are saying, we can think them. And as soon as we open our mouth, a whole different part of us might show up. And so being able to practice that confidence, being able to go through the motions, comes down to, at least from what I glean from our conversations, because I'm not as familiar with it, what courageous conversations are. So will you define that for us and give us some framework around it?
Yes, and with your permission, I'd like to give a backdrop of the 5 principles of leadership that I work with.
Yes, let's do that.
And a position and a behavior relative to a leader. So my 5 principles are integrity, which means I am my word. Accountability, responsible for all, responsible for our thoughts, our actions, our words. And then courage, which is the one we'll get to. And the fourth one is passion. Not passionate as far as being happy and joyful, but passionate towards the vision, either your vision, the team's vision, the company's vision. And then humility, putting others first. So back to courage. It's the courageous conversations come from a place of knowing that what you're going to share, either in a question or in a request, comes from a place of authenticity. It's not meant to hurt. It's meant to serve. It's not meant to tell. It's to ask. It's to guide. It's to lead. But you do that coming from a place of, I know if I say this, it's going to make both of us, not just me, better. So it's not arguing with courage. It's having a conversation from a place of the heart, where if I get this out on the table, I know we being the 2 of us, the 3 of us, the 5 of us, we can be more powerful. We can save time, money, and energy if we just talk about what most people aren't having or aren't making the courage to have a conversation around. And most of the time, it can start with a beautiful question, such as, Jess, would you be willing to? Or are you open to? Or would you allow me to? And I always ask the question before that, ask yourself, what's the worst thing that can happen?
Mhm.
Jess could, mute me for the rest of the show. She could tell me I'm never coming back on. She could say, I think servant leadership is silly. But if I continue to ask what I believe are serving and leading questions, leading in terms of leadership, what's the worst thing Jess could do? And so if it goes well, guess what happens? You develop more courage. I develop more courage. And what do you think happens to our relationship as a result of it?
Mhm. Well, so how do you deal with drama in all of that? Because you could start with the question and still trigger somebody to go, I can't say those words on air, but ape something,
Yep.
right?
Yep. But again, is it okay? Great question. Is it your drama, the person asking the question, or is it their drama who owns some stuff then is not even relevant to the question or not even relevant to the conversation? So back to courageous conversation. Remind them where in a kind way, and I would say being kind to considerate at all times, not at all cost, but at all times is something we could all probably put on a notepad and keep in front of us more often than not. If you walk into a really good elementary or first grade or even a second grade school, look above the door and see if you don't see the words be kind or be kind and considerate, being conscientious. So through all of this, politely remind the person, I hear you being dramatic. I hear you having something you want to discuss that doesn't have anything to do with the conversation. Is it all right with you if we get through this particular point first? Let's focus on the objective at hand. And again, even some of that takes courage, because as a drama king or a drama queen, we're sitting here listening, hearing, well, this person doesn't care about me. They're not letting me vomit drama on them. Well, grow up to a
Cheers
certain
to
degree.
that, my friend. Cheers to that. Speaking of, are you just drinking a cup of coffee while we're chatting?
Yes, ma'am.
Like water. What's the cup say?
It says Fort Lewis College.
Fantastic.
That's
That's good.
that's where I did my studies.
That's where you did your study school. And
Mhm.
how long have you been in the Denver area?
This time in March of 2010.
Okay, so several years. You've got a few years on me being in the area,
Yeah.
which I wouldn't trade for anything, right? The years I'm like, oh, this is the place that was built for me, and I didn't know till I arrived.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Albuquerque and I spent 17 years in Texas. Believe me,
Yeah.
I never thought I'd end up in Texas, but it was very good for me professionally and financially. And when people asked, how do you like Texas? I would say, I love it. I just miss the mountains. And that was coming from experience of living in Albuquerque and, believe it or not, Palm Springs, California, that has identical landscaping than it to some of that other areas I've been in. So yeah, I love the mountains. I love the thin air. I love the sun.
Hmm.
We have been Californicated here the last several years, and real estate's demonstrating that, but it's not much different than other wonderful cities.
Isn't that interesting? Because Texas was experiencing that at one point, and Seattle was experiencing that at another point, and I find it. I find the change in our communities very interesting, and I'm going to go back to the drama because when we're working with somebody, right, we find ourselves in situations where we don't know. We don't know where other people came from. Sometimes we choose them, sometimes we don't choose them. We're just told we're going to be working together. Um, and so somebody may be a drama king or a drama queen, yet there also just may be stuff under the surface
Yep.
that we don't know about, that we walk on, and we make this other person feel unsafe or unappreciated. And boy, do they let us know. Not you.
But I would like to bring this up. You
Please.
said we make them feel.
Well, I'm thinking because it's their perspective. It's like, whoops, if we're having a conversation and there's more than just me and another person, there's a we. So let's say somebody else was in this conversation with us, and that person all of a sudden, right?
So
We stepped on a minefield and we didn't know it existed.
so let's introduce ownership versus victim.
Love it.
Okay. So when someone says, "Hey, you made me feel this way." Okay, well, what behavior, what time, what tone, what words did I use that I, as a leader or as a courageous communicator, I could have adjusted to be more kind and more considerate or make the point? But when someone says that, typically they're coming from a place of they're not owning their stuff
Mhm.
And we can politely remind them how you feel is your choice. But back to being a servant leader, again, you're not telling them what to do. You're guiding and suggesting and providing impact and influence in order to get something accomplished. Again, if they want to go off the rail and talk, and I'm not saying feelings are negative, I'm just trying to bring into this conversation that we don't own other people's stuff. And when they throw their stuff on us, just don't let it stick, and let them know, as a leader, I'm not going to own that. Now, I do want to find out where you're coming from. I do want to find out, why this is making you upset, of course, because you care about the individual, but we don't own anyone else's feelings. It's different perhaps as a mother and a father.
Mhm.
In an organization, if you start taking if you believe or start to take ownership of other people's feelings and their victimhood behavior, you'll drive yourself nuts.
That is so interesting. This is, by the way, everybody who's listening, they know a lot of my personal stories. So I'm like, this is a skill that I had to learn. I'm like, oh, why am I taking on that person's anger? What makes it necessary for me to show up in this way that I'm going to feel guilty or feel like it's my fault or accept blame for something that occurred before I ever engaged in some sort of a relationship? And being able to be in a hard conversation, one of the things I have to say sometimes, and I've said it in both work and personal relationships, is, hey, dude, this is my feeling. You can't have my feeling.
Mm-mm.
And do it from the reverse, because you're being able to recognize, oh, look, I'm angry right now, or wow, I'm really frustrated. And that can set off somebody else's drama or some of their triggers. And I'm like, hey, well, just sit over there. I'm going to do this and we'll figure it out together. Can you please show up in that capacity? Don't be frustrated for me. Let
And
me
what
be frustrated.
and what's really cool about this part of our conversation, Jess, is when two owners get together
Yeah.
and they own 100% of everything they do, say, feel, and think, and so does the other person, the conversations usually go northeast, or as I like to say, to the right and up. And it's progressive.
Yes.
We come to solutions. We put all the petty stuff behind us. And when you get two victims talking, then a lot of stuff, well, I would say not a lot of stuff gets solved, and it's
Right.
it's always about me, or they're complaining about someone who's not in the room.
And the same issue, the same problem resurfaces over and over and over again.
So the courageous conversation question there is, when I hear someone saying that they don't have this or they want that, or and what they're not saying is, my choices and my behaviors have not allowed me to do or get or have the things that I really want. But they don't understand the language because they've lived in a victim neighborhood most of their life. Now
Or they
again,
don't understand that their choice played a part.
their choices always play a part. And when a 17-year-old is complaining about what he or she doesn't have and comparing to everybody else, and when you don't give it to it, they call you names as a parent, etc., that's not going to change.
Mhm.
If you wake up tomorrow and say, you know what, I'm going to go appease my son or daughter and give them everything that other people in the neighborhood have, and then what? Have they shown up as an owner at all? Have they earned your trust and respect for them to have everything that you believe, not they believe they need? And you can add 20 years to that, and find out, where are the victims in your organization, and why are these behaviors being appeased versus serving the owners within your organization. And during your reviews, recognize the difference, the valuable difference between victim and owner behavior. So, and you
Staying right here on this thread, it's really important, because what we're talking about, and this is where I'm like, all right, there's really no good way to say it except for to just say it, which is, this is not an immediate result, which you've also said several times. The end game is relationship, and results and is a positive byproduct of that most of the time. And so to make a shift, or to build in something where we are in a people that are listening, and I know I've been in this situation before, results run everything. So at all costs, the results matter. Okay, we can do that. And when we're in this situation, we might go, okay, I get that I have to own stuff, all right, I'm listening to Greg here. I have to own stuff. And how do I show up and do that? And basically, it can still be all about the results and changing everything and changing that one thing. What can I own about my own behavior? What choices am I making here? And then from that place, be able to put up, right? What is that thing that they said, that we said when we were kids? Your sticks and stones may break my bones, but your words will never hurt me.
Right.
I think this fits here, because then we can go, okay, cool. I'm not going to let anybody take my emotions or feelings, and I'm going to and I'm going to recognize when other people have emotions and feelings that I must let them have and stay away from. And I think that particular thing, out of our entire conversation, knowing that this is a long-term thing, that one action, ownership of even just feelings, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff that could then be added on after feelings. What is mine? What is theirs? What is my feeling? What is their feeling? Is a really great way to start, because it's not going to change anything. It's not going to change a culture. It does go back to your very first question. Why do I do what I do? And then what am I supposed to do while I'm here? And I say supposed to because a lot of us are still figuring that out. What do I want to do while I'm here? And then do my choices reflect that? Would that be accurate? Would you add anything else into what I'm taking away as maybe that first step of, I might not be in a great place and I can start anywhere? So,
Well, yes. And what I'd add to that, Jess, is the awareness.
okay.
Awareness for someone to say, you know what, there are times where I show up as a victim. I show up as a
Yes.
needy, creepy individual. And how do I move to ownership? How do I make it less about me? And to Scott's question, I just wanted to add this too. When you're in a team setting and someone shows up as a victim, and the leader has made every attempt to remind him or her to own their stuff, a teammate or a follower could also say, hey, Greg, you're showing up like someone we don't recognize. Please own your stuff. It will help not only you, but all of us, and remind them it's not about you. So that's something else I would throw in there. But yes, if we focus on what we want relative to the big why, I think it helps everybody get along better.
Rebecca Davidson, who is also here in the Denver area, said to me once that in a conversation, and this was so great, she goes, you know, this thing keeps coming up, and that we're talking about a lot in the circles that she works in. Maybe this is not about me. It's
No,
so brilliant, right?
right.
Maybe this is not about me. And I think that makes a big difference. Those few things. And awareness is one of my favorite things to talk about, in addition to being curious. And that's actually one of my personal values is
Yeah.
curiosity, and just the ability to see from more perspectives. Another person whom I love and admire, his name is Dr. Donald Epstein. He talks about, oh, and I totally lost it. Now I got his name right, and I totally lost what I love about him. It'll come back in a minute. We'll just go.
Have anything to do with awareness?
Oh, yes, it did. Thank you. He talks about perspective and like in the concept of dimension. When we are able to think and see what we have, and then turn around and see what the person with us has, we now go from one-dimensional to two-dimensional. And then when we add a third person and we see what that third person is doing and how they are showing up, and we are able to distinguish them from the first two, we now have a third dimension, and that it is exponentially expanding, and that how much more we can see in the place that we're at to be able to make the right decision at the right time, the right choice at the right time for right now's situation based off of that.
And there's also something that's pretty prevalent in leadership coaching in general, but it's the beach ball theory. If we're both holding a beach ball, and let's say that's our major objective, but you're looking at the color green and I'm looking at the color orange or blue, or bottom line is we're looking at two different colors. We're talking about the same thing, but your perspective is different from where you're seeing it. There's two things to do there. One is to remind each other that holding this beach ball up and making sure it always is full of air is the number one, or maybe one of the highest objectives. And then just gently turn the beach ball the other way. So now you're seeing my color and I'm seeing yours. And now I can see where you're coming from. Now, the desire to have empathy, the desire to understand someone else's perspective, that's part of being a servant leader. That's part of caring for where the other person's coming from. I mean, dare I say empathy, but empathy and accountability are two of the things I see leaders struggle with most. And the top one is humility. Not believing there's anyone else in the room but me because I'm this, and then they follow that by the title. I will go on record and say, I don't care what your title is. Senior vice president, regional vice president, director, CEO. I hear all this. Well, I coach C-suites. Well, okay.
I don't know what that means myself.
C-suites, like anything with a C, CEO, COO.
Well, I know. And I'm the CEO of Red Direction. And I'm like, if you're telling me you work with the C-suite, you're really not talking to me. You're talking about me.
Right. And I try and remind everyone that I work with human beings.
Right, as do I. And that's one of the things I really like about you, Greg. And that's one of the reasons I knew when we first talked, this would be a great show, because ambiguity, dealing with ambiguity, setting the priorities, who's the steward of something that we're all showing up, the beach ball, right? The organization we're in, the beach ball that we've got, really matters. And it is hard work. And we forget, because where we're coming from, we're in a swing, aren't we? We're in a swing from productivity and efficiency, and the human is making stuff possible, versus, right, the beings that come to work every day are making stuff possible, versus swinging toward this place of, oh, yes, there's still something to be done here. And who knew? We've added dimension when we think about how we build relationship here, because then the metrics all happen. And metrics can be refined once the relationships are in place, is one of the things I'm taking away from you. It's also something I personally believe, is that, hey, when we have good relationship, we have the ability to show up in a different way, show up when something is needed. And when we've got that, we're willing to pitch in, we're willing to support, we're willing to give, trade, volunteer, do something extra to make sure that the beach ball in your description there stays in the air or filled with air.
Yeah, and is in a safe and secure place. And the other thing that comes to mind, you and I had talked about the measurement. How do you measure the heart of a servant leader? How do you measure leadership in general? How do you measure that all of this relationship stuff? A lot of people think this is a soft skill, and I will remind you that without trusting, kind and considerate relationships built on authenticity, your company at some point, or those key relationships, are going to fall apart. And without even knowing it, the key people will just leave and start a new company, and surprise, he may be competing with you in 8 months. So the measurement is return on investment, yes, but I also want to introduce return on intention, because what are the intentions of the individual? What are the intentions of the team? And how do you measure that? It's measured in efficiency of our word. Tell the truth and say it. Tell it as honest and as brief as you can, and then start asking the questions that all help us become more focused on what it is we need to accomplish. But trust is key. Absolutely trust. And I ran across a great acronym the other day, and I'll send it to you if you like. But trust for this person was tell the truth. That's the T. The R is relevant. Be relevant with what you're talking about. Tell a story. Be unselfish. It's not about you. Make it simple. And I don't mean keep it simple, stupid. I mean keep it simple because there is no need for elaboration, and then timely. Timeliness comes into all of this conversation all the time. So
I'm telling you, this is great stuff here. And I encourage everybody to not only think about what Greg has been sharing today, take some action.
Yep.
Do a behavior, act to plan, right? This purposeful action, 2 things that I live by, hashtags that I use: purposeful action, this concept of intention, this concept of choosing servant, this concept of being the leader of ourselves, and having leadership qualities, knowing that sometimes we are the leader of ourselves and nobody's following us, and other times they are, and recognizing those differences, adding perspective, adding awareness, being curious, willing to go after the big questions, the whys of the big questions. And you'll find all of the program notes here at thevoiceofboldbusiness.com/P139. You can also search the website, Behaviors and Relationships Leading to Highly Functional Teams. Subscribe, listen, and remember how I said purposeful action? Do something. This is the thing to do. Tell us your story. Tell us what you took away. What was an insight? What have you done differently? Where have you seen success? Because you and me and Greg and Eva and Scott and everybody in the world, we have the choice to show up, and we define what it means to be a leader today. So let's do it. Until next time, make sure that the behaviors that you're taking support the relationships that you're building to get to that highly functional team.
Subscribe at thevoiceofboldbusiness.com and get more information, program notes, and past episodes. Bold leaders approach each situation and focus on action to achieve a higher level of leadership. Jessica Dewell, your business advocate, is the host of the Voice of Bold Business Radio. Thank you for joining us.